to stand behind the podium. Okay, good evening and Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thanks to the Sikhs in the city. I can't figure out whether Sikhs in the city, Sikhs and the city, or city Sikhs. There seems to be multiple groups with the similar names, which sort of is borrowing, seems to be from Punjabi politics, because every political party in Punjab has probably a Khalsa, and somehow they play with those three drums. One is Badals, one is Mans, and other people's. But anyway, I'll focus on today's subject. You know, the title was given to me, Sikh Sovereignty and Clashes with South Asian Rulers. I have modified it just slightly, just with the prepositions where they go. But when I got this title, I'm like, what are they really interested in? What do they want to know? So the question which I went after was that it seems to me that most of the world is focused on figuring out why is it that Sikhs get into these fights? Is 84 an anomaly which happened only in the last 27 years? Were there similar things happening before? Do Sikhs just have issues with the Indian state? Or have they had these kind of issues with other states, nation states? Is it something which was manufactured in just last century? Or was this something which has been there since the inception of the religious as well as revolutionary tradition? I don't want to just use the word religion or revolution. The reason is these are still Western paradigms which are being superimposed on what happened in South Asia to understand who we are as people. But I'll use them in a loose sense, in a generic sense. But academically, what religion has its own connotations and its own parameters on how do you measure certain things. For example, Semitic faith or the Western methodology dictates how do you look at Sikhs. So today when I get into this, the part, Sikhs part deals with the people part. What is the Sikh psyche about? How did the psyche get developed? Who developed this sort of paradigms or praxis which Sikhs are operating in? Sovereignty, I'll just invoke dictionary definition at some point and say, okay, this is what sovereignty means, and we're going to cover those areas. And clashes with South Asian rulers is self-explanatory, that anyone who has been ruling South Asia, and intentionally I'm not calling it India or Pakistan, because those are British map making of 47 onwards. Before that, the whole region, today that region will have multiple nation states in it. So South Asia seems to be a more generic term which explains what happened in that geopolitical reality. And interestingly, in an introduction it was said that this might be the right venue to talk about this stuff, and I was looking outside at the gallery, what is being displayed here, and there was this depiction of Jagannath Puri, which is where Guru Nanak Sahib went, the founder of the Sikh faith, and had a critique of what was happening at a ritual level, and also not just a ritual level, but at a religious level, what had become a religious superstructure. Right next to it, I saw there was a flyer which was talking about how a new interpretation of Firdausis is coming out, a new book, a new editing of it, a new interpretation. And that whole manuscript is about, it covers 5 Mughal emperors as to what they did. And guess what? This is exactly what we're going to talk about. Gurus in their lives, how they looked at religious and political superstructures in their time, and what institutions were developed which developed the Sikh psyche, and perhaps that will help us to develop a response to why is it that Sikhs get into these political conflicts. So roughly this is the agenda. I'm going to invoke a little bit ideas from what our scriptural canon is about, which basically means, Sikhs have varieties of religious experiences as well, just like any other tradition. But the highest level is Guru Granth Sahib. So that's what I mean by scriptural canon. What ideas of sovereignty are available in Guru Granth Sahib? We'll get into sort of what I call 10 days history, because in history they say 50 years is one day. So by that measure, in the world religious and political traditions, Sikhs are still toddlers. They're only 10 days old. Yeah. So we'll get into those 10 days of what has happened in the last 550 years. I've used this phrase to explain, if you want to understand multiple dimensions of Sikh psyche, you got to understand symbolism behind Rabab and Khanda. Rabab is something which is invoked at Guru Nanak's time to experience the divine strength, which we generally call revelation in Western traditions. And Khanda gets invoked, what do you do with that strength? And that becomes a journey again of the Sikh nation. What institutions were developed during Guru period, what ideas were explored, which became again part of Sikh psyche. We'll get into certain historical precedents and how Sikh psyche was developed. And hopefully we will have at least one response to why Sikhs fight, which hopefully is built on more of a Sikh narrative rather than the ruler's narrative. You know, the history of the world is written by the victors. So, what, for example, we are in London, what J.D. Cunningham writes about Akali Phula Singh is very different than what our own psyche says about Akali Phula Singh. So, I'm here to provide a bit of a Sikh narrative and explanation on why is it that Sikhs go on to fight with the rulers of the time. So, that's the agenda. And since the word sovereignty is used, I mean, here are the 4 elements according to the Oxford English Dictionary. I thought I should stick to Oxford rather than American since I'm here. And if you look at the qualifications given here, essentially you will see, you know, the word power and dominations we are quite used to hearing, you know. These are the synonyms of sovereignty. Another thing you'll hear is its authority or rule, power of supreme ruler, royal authority or dominion. Other things mentioned are monarchical government, absolute or independent authority, and at some point, it also implies independent state or territory under the rule of a sovereign. So, the words which we can use to describe this, I mean, you can have several parallels to it. The word freedom gets invoked, the word independence gets invoked. In the last 27 years, there have been certain ideas related to word Khalistan which have been used. In 1940s, the word Sikhistan, Mahapunjab, Azad Punjab were used. Before that, there was a Sikh empire under Ranjit Singh, which is heavily celebrated, at least in this city, with the exhibitions. But if you try to talk about similar ideas 100 years later, it becomes heavily controversial. So we have to look at all these things and hopefully come up with what is this idea of sovereignty. We will stick to all 4 levels. Because again, you know, this is a dictionary definition. How it enters people, how it enters institutions, how it enters group of people. We cannot fully capture it by 1 or 2 definitions, but we will have glimpses of all this in the varieties of religious institutions Sikhs have developed. So I start with, I mean, as a presenter, I get to pick whose quotes I want to use. And here I end up using Harinder Singh's. Let me talk about this man a bit. Most of the Sikh history has been written by whoever was trying to rule over Sikhs. So whether it's Persian writers, invaders and their chronicles, whether it was the British agents who were hired by the British government to write it, whether it was the Bengali civil servants who were working for the British government, generally speaking, they were trying to create a perspective which will suit their masters or their funders in today's research sense, if we can call it. Harinder Singh is one of the few guys who actually went and sat in a library which 100 years ago Sikhs had developed in Faridkot. It's called Takht Singh Library. It doesn't exist in its highest levels today, but whatever remained there, we have digitized it and put it up on PDF, the Punjab Digital Library. And he did an 8-volume study of history of the Sikhs, and this is what he says. The story of rise and development of Sikhism, I have issues with the word Sikhism as well, but commonly what we call Sikhism, we'll stick to it, because isms are also a Western creation. It's actually a Western methodology to understand our Eastern thoughts. You know, you'll never hear Christianism as a word, do you? Christianity or Islamism, although it's been developed now, it was always Islam earlier. And whenever you add the term ism, one of the things which happens is, it basically presumes then or presupposes that there is no singularity or unity of doctrine. Which is not true in Sikhi. The word is Sikhi for Sikhs. Our word actually is Sikhi. In Guru Granth Sahib, the word is Sikhi. But Sikhism, we'll say, is generally is a common interpretation of what the term for our religion is. So the story of rise and development of Sikhism is one of the most stirring and striking chapters in world history. It is a people's movement. Now this I want to stress quite a bit. I know it gets interpreted, reinterpreted, deconstructed, and postmodernist approaches are being applied to it. But at the end of all, I mean, almost everything you'll see, it comes down to people's movement, which means there has to be a people's history version of it, not just one individual's history or one clan's leader's history. It is a people's movement based on democracy, secularism, and socialism without any barrier of caste, color, or country. Even the word country needs to be emphasized here, because country implies nation states. Now, what is Harinder Singh saying? He's essentially saying what Sikhs have done from Guru Nanak onwards, this is my interpretation, is that they were developing those instruments, they were developing those institutions which will capture or fight the powers to be and deliver that power to people or distribute it to people. Now, this is very, very different than what we are used to. If you say, generally you ask somebody what is Sikhism, they'll tell you that you're supposed to meditate this and eat this and dress like this and don't do this. In fact, I was doing a lecture about 2 months ago somewhere, and one of the youngsters came up to me, a college student, and he said, you know, this is the first time I actually learned about what Sikhi is, because so far I thought it was just a religion of don'ts. Because we are really not talking about what is a larger thesis. And in the larger thesis, this fits into what we are discussing today. That it was a people's movement based on whatever these words mean to us. I know they're debatable, or they need to be contextualized for each country as well. For example, secularism and socialism in America, you know, Barack Obama, being a socialist is a very negative thing in America because of the Tea Party movement there. So I know they have their own connotations, but here we will stick to whatever those ideals represent, the general understanding of these ideals. Okay, so before I get into how was this a political movement to give power to the people, let's talk about, this is the, if anyone wants to talk about, I submit to you, about Sikhi, they have to start with this, because this is the opening of the Sikh scriptural canon, Guru Granth Sahib. We do not interpret this enough to figure out what is our doctrine. What is the divinity of Sikhi? Why do we keep using the word God, for example, when Sikhs are trying to describe what Ikko Onkar is? Guru Nanak didn't say there is one Rab or there is one God. Rab is the most common word for God in Punjabi language. He didn't use those words. So, I mean, I'm using the word force here because I'm a Star Wars fan and there are a variety of other reasons. But this makes sense to me because Guru Nanak didn't say there was one God or one Rab. He was saying there was oneness of some kind which brings us together. There's an integration, and this is where our political movements will make sense. They were never about one person or one clan, and if they were reduced to that, they were never made part of the Sikh movement. Sikhi was always about bringing power to the people type idea. And the reason I want to get into this is because in Sikh tradition, whoever exhibits from this quality to this quality, in Sikh tradition that means they are the ones who are graced. So, you know, among Sikhs, within Sikhs, intra-Sikh and inter-Sikh relationship these days, they're not discussing this. Because we are not looking at what is the Sikh ideology or the doctrine. Sikh doctrine says the person who is graced is the one who exhibits these behaviors. In fact, the very idea of God or force in Sikhi becomes behavior. How do you operate in life? So, for example, are you a creative personality? Are you fearless? Do you perceive that you have enemies or others call you that you are their enemy? So this is very much sort of cognitive aspects which need to come into, eventually are translated into behaviors. Now if this is what the idea of Sikhi is, that I am going to operate in a timeless manner, I'm going to operate in a creative manner, I'm not going to be scared by anyone, I mean this becomes a very, very different kind of a Sikh. And this is what Guru Nanak describes as Sikhi is. So we can have 7th level interpretation of what Guru Nanak's Japji is, or we can start with the opening of Japji, which is the opening of Guru Granth Sahib. Now the very idea of Sikhi starts from this. Anyone who displays these behaviors, they are actually the graced ones. You know, today we have our different idea of who's graced and who's not, whether who will go to heaven or hell, or all kind of nonsense which is floating out there these days. But nobody's looking at the primary element which defines the Sikh behavior. So the sovereignness in Sikhi comes from this idea. If at some point you don't need somebody to tell you what kind of Sikh you need to be, that's when you become a sovereign. That you are gathering enough intelligence, enough emotion, you know, all sorts of IQs which we call them today. When enough of those enter into you, that's part that that's how you exhibit that you are graced. Grace for us is not some miracle evangelical thing that somebody's going to hit on your forehead and you're going to enter it. For us, grace is when the behavior becomes like this. So the sovereignness in Sikhi enters from these ideas which translate into people's behavior. And this is where Guru Granth Sahib describes Guru Nanak as not just being a spiritualist, but somebody who enjoyed political leadership as well. These are rough translations from Guru Granth Sahib, and I'll just cover, I mean, look at the ones which are highlighted. Guru Nanak established the dominion by raising the fort of truth on strong foundation. Dominion, remember, that was part of being sovereign. Vocabulary being used is this in Guru Granth Sahib. With the sword of Guru's divine wisdom, exuding might and bravery, he gave the gift of life. The symbolism of sword is being used, symbolism of wisdom is being used. Guru Nanak, there's a statement on Guru Nanak by a bard poet in Guru Granth Sahib which says, you enjoy both political and spiritual sovereignty. But among Sikhs you will generally won't hear this. We will just present Guru Nanak as being someone who is only spiritually qualified to lead and give us spiritual guidance only. But that's not true based on, there's only one unification point for Sikhs in the world. It's Guru Granth Sahib. Every Sikh believes in it. Everything else, there's a debate. And the thing which has the most unification point among Sikhs, they're not even interpreting that properly. And here's the third part, which is Baba Farid's statement. He says, and he's speaking to Vaheguru or God or whatever the one force idea is, and he says, do not make me subservient to anyone. I'd rather you take my life out of this body. So he's essentially saying, I don't want to be slave of anyone. Don't put me on this earth if you're going to put me under someone. These are very, very powerful, what we will classically call spiritual ideas. But look into the politics of Guru Granth Sahib, if I may term it that. The politics of Guru Granth Sahib is embedded as part of its spirituality. I was listening to NPR, which is sort of like your BBC in America, and one of the leading theologians there was saying that Christianity should think about making political activism as part of their spirituality. And while listening to it, I was thinking, wow, these guys actually have to manufacture it. For Sikhs, this was given as part of their spirituality, and we are running away from it. I mean, look at the contrast. Just war theory in Christianity didn't come until St. Augustine. But we have just war theory within Sikh tradition from day one, and we run away from it. So somewhere, somehow, the Sikhi which is being presented is not even based on Guru Granth Sahib, is the point I'm trying to make. Now, look at these two charts. On the left side, you're looking at the house of Nanak, the phrase which you will hear among Sikhs quite a bit, which represents the 10 gurus. And on the right side is Mughals, the dynasty which probably in the modern Indian, modern South Asian era, the first dynasty to actually consolidate what we now call South Asia. Before that, it was 2,000, 3,000 years ago by Mauryas and other people. These people consolidated what we now call South Asia. Here are their counterparts, who we call gurus, or the founders of the Sikh faith. Every single one has an incredible relationship of some kind with the ruler of the time. We don't present this idea as well. Every single guru dealt with the ruler of the time. Whoever, and as basically you can call them heads of state. Today we will call them heads of state. What were the protocols on how they met? When one was summoned, did they just show up, or did they send their emissary? It's like today, if there is, Libya being freed, why is it that Hillary Clinton has to rush to France when one of their leading persons says that I was tortured by CIA in Thailand? So you send certain emissaries, right? Similar things are happening in this period. When the ruler or the head of the state says to Guru Arjan, I want to know what's written in Guru Granth Sahib, does he himself go or does he send Baba Buddha Ji, who was the leading theologian of the time? When same thing happens at the time of Guru Har Rai Sahib, he sends someone else too, but that person becomes a sellout to the community. So we have had those kind of things going on. Guru Nanak, when he sees a genocide, does he do a Akhand Path like Sikhs do this uninterrupted reading of Akhand Paths? He doesn't do that. He actually protests and he's jailed for protesting. It's a very, very different interaction occurring which we are not used to hearing in the Sikh community now. Now, interestingly, these guys were called Badshah, which generally implies the word emperor or the ruler. Sikhs, even today, when they do the bowing or mathading in front of Guru Granth Sahib, they call it Sacha Badshah, the true king. So these were called the kings, and they were called the true kings. So even symbolically, you can see, the protocol, symbolism, insignia, all these things matter. Doctrine and practice of that doctrine definitely is there, but even the symbolism is very, very important. So Sikh psyche, even today, I don't know, knowingly or unknowingly, maybe it's subliminal, they still actually continue to call their gurus Padshah or Sacha Padshah, which actually means the true king, the true ruler. Now, what were their relationship? Let's explore that a bit. This is M.A. McAuliffe, Max Arthur McAuliffe. He was asked by British initially to write about the Sikhs. At some point he said, I stopped your job, and he independently started writing about the Sikhs. If you want to understand the oral tradition of the Sikhs, this was the first written depiction of the Sikh oral tradition. And his book is in 6 volumes, Sikh religion and their writings. And this is what he writes about how the gurus were becoming a political force. He says in the time of Afghan kings, which were the invaders who were coming to India, nobles were styled Masnad-e Ali. Ali invokes powerful emotions in Islamic tradition. He was one of the caliphs as well as a son-in-law of Prophet Muhammad. And those who were fighting on behalf of those invaders, they were called Masnad-e Ali. Hence the word Masnad was employed as an ordinary appellation of courtiers. From its frequent use, it was changed in the mouths of the Sikhs into Masan. The Guru was called Sacha Padshah, or the true king, so his agents were styled Masans. So Sikhs changed the word Masnad to Masan. Now I know Masans eventually became corrupt, and they were outlawed in the 10th generation of the Guru period. But in the 3rd generation, when they were started this by Guru Amar Das Sahib, why Guru Amar Das Sahib is starting this, he establishes 22 manjis, which essentially is an administrative unit, because the Mughal Empire is set up in 22 administrative units. What is he doing? Why is he doing? He's appointing, at that time, 3 or up to 4, depending on which historian you go by, women, to be the leaders of those administrative units. This is where Masan systems start. Masans were just not the religious caretaker as we have made up to be. They were actually administrative heads of what we will call, ridings or whatever you call them here for your voting systems. So the particular area, there's a head who represents what the thought of the Guru is. In this case, McAuliffe is recording this. This slide essentially is, you can look on this slide, on the bottom those are the 10 rulers, and I want to focus quite a bit on the relationship between the South Asian Mughal rulers and the Gurus. And there are a lot of details in here, and you can see what's going on, and this is where the intersection is, which Guru is intersecting which ruler, and you can kind of see what's going on here. Point I'm trying to make here is, actually let's just do a statistical thing. I generally say this and you can see how it's visualized now. 6 out of the 10 Gurus were either jailed, politically tortured, a political assassination attempt, or martyred. How is this just a religious tradition? I mean, this is very, very clear what is happening at the time. If you are being imprisoned, and I'll show you some of those slides from the writers at the time, there is something, you are challenging what we today will call imperialism or hegemonic intrusions or whatever else you want to call it. They were, in fact, Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib, the 9th king, 9th Nanak, there was a hitman hired to kill him. He missed. Yeah. I mean, this is amazing stuff going on. And, Sikhs cannot afford to just say that I have done my ritualistic part and Simran or whatever else the words are being invoked. All that is done in Sikh tradition. But the externalization of all that was that Gurus were out there in the field addressing the social, political, economic issues. It's like today, a couple of days ago, Archbishop of Canterbury, he made a statement on what's happening here on St. Paul's occupation. And then within 24 hours, the church reverses decision because I think there was a dean who resigned. Where do you see this in Sikh religious tradition these days? Today, among Sikh community, wherever somebody feels they are spiritual leaders or the sons so-called, the word is up for sale. I just saw a book title by a local guy where he's been given the title Sant now as a publisher. But anyway, that word has absolutely no meaning. Because Sant in Sikh tradition was the person who, while spiritually developing himself, and who better to go after than the Gurus, that they were dealing with political alliances, economic issues, taxation. That's why they were being hunted. That's why they were being martyred. This is something serious. Every Sikh has to think about what was happening in these 241 years. Now let's look into a little bit on what people are observing. The harshness with which Jahangir treated the Sikh Guru appears to have stemmed from Arjan is Guru Arjan Sahib, perceived political threat, then from hostility to his religious doctrines as such. His point is, Jahangir, who is the Mughal emperor, one of the major reasons, according to Mr. Richards, is that Jahangir ordered martyrdom of Guru Arjan because he perceived Guru Arjan to be a political threat, not a spiritual issue. He says he had no issues with that you can do all the part and all the, it's like today, almost every sant so-called, the so-called quote-unquote religious personality will tell you to do only religious things and nobody has issues with them because they are not a threat to anyone. It's like even in America, I'm citing correlations, when Bush was president there, he started something called a campus watch list, where every professor who spoke against the US administration, they were loading him down to make sure their basically promotions were revoked. That kind of stuff happens even today. Similar things were happening back then. Let's look at what I.D. Gaur writes, and basically I want to focus on this. And this is about Guru Arjan's martyrdom, the fifth Guru. Rather, the cause of the martyrdom was grounded in the inherent conflict between the hegemonic and counter-hegemonic forces. A state exercises its power wherever it perceives that its hegemony is being defied by those whom it identifies as rebel or counter-hegemonic or anti-establishment. Now this is very, very important. This is essentially establishing that what Guru Nanak through Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj, in this case, the specific cases of Guru Arjan, the fifth Guru of the Sikhs, what they were doing were, they were setting up not just declarations. Declaration is one thing. Like in our case, declaration is what Mool Mantra says. But they actually went forward to implement those declarations, and they started developing what we in the West now call liberal institutions to make sure those things were done. And when it took, if the cost of that was to give up their physical life, they demonstrated they're willing to do it. And like I said, 6 out of the 10 gurus went through that process. Now, this is one of the Sikh oral tradition eventually written down. It's very interesting. This is regarding the 6th Guru. It says, the first battle, and the context of this is, the first battle fought by any of the Gurus was that there are imperial forces hunting and Sikhs are hunting. Sikhs capture a hawk. Imperial forces wanted they wanted the hawk back, and the Sikhs decided not to give it back. They said, we are independent people too, man. If we are hunting too, how come we have to give this back? And the issue went to Guru Hargobind Sahib, and he says, you're right. The issue became, where does the imperial right stop, and where does the people's right begin? On that issue, where symbolically was over hawk, who gets to keep the hawk, was the first battle of Guru Hargobind Sahib. It's a battle of ideas. That at what point does imperialism have to stop, at what point people's right begin. And in that context, this is said in context of that battle, that Guru Hargobind Sahib said, I will not give them the hawk, but take away all their kingdom. I will take away their country and royalty and distribute it among the deprived. Look at the running theme. The Sikhs have always been about capturing political power, although that's sort of a controversial phrase to use these days. But capturing their power was always for the deprived, always for the people. What Harinder Singh is writing. Sikhs, whenever they went out to capture power, it was always to distribute among what we will call commoners. Since I'm in England, I have to use those words. The commoners, giving power to an everyday person. Okay. Now, let's come back to what kind of effect or impact was this generating? And this is Hariram Gupta writing that essentially he's saying that gurus had created a state within a state. Now, I really want to spend a little bit of time on this slide. Let's look at it. To the symbols of sainthood was added the paraphernalia of sovereignty, including the umbrella and crest. With meditation and preaching were included riding, wrestling, and hunting. This is very important. So you know how these days also within the Sikh community there's a debate whether one should be spiritual or an active one. And what Harinder Gupta is writing is this was not a debate. This was a Sikh lifestyle. That anyone who does meditation is also going to learn wrestling. That kind of idea. The Guru created a government of his own like that of the Mughals. So you know if you have a parallel government, you're going to have problems, and that's why there are problems. All his disciples formed a separate and independent entity and had nothing to do with the agencies of the government of the day. Thus the Sikhs came to occupy a kind of a separate state within the Mughal state, the position of which was securely established by the fiscal policy. That's where economic comes in. Taxation, I mentioned earlier, Guru Granth Sahib has a whole shabad about, unless you have a fair taxation, there will not be political stability. Guess what's happening in Occupy Wall Street movement to what's happening here and other places. It's about, you know, how the commoners, 99% as they are saying in America, are being treated by 1%. Even actually that is a misnomer. In America actually, the policies are now being established by 0.05. they give the highest political contributions to both parties, and those people end up deciding how to deal with 99.95% of the population. And that's not my data, that's what they call the CBO office, which is the non-partisan office in America which decides these things, or comes up with these things. So anyway, the position which was securely established by the fiscal policy of Guru Amar Das. Remember, Guru Amar Das is the one who creates 22 administrative units. So they're not just religious people, they're collecting taxes. They're collecting money. They're deciding what to do with that money. And Guru Arjan had his own armed system. So if you they generally say, if you have your own army and you have your own taxation and you have your own institution, that's what governments are. That's your armed forces to keep enemies out and keep peace, as they say, and rest is about how governance in the territory you're governing. This is happening within Guru period. We haven't even touched outside Guru period. Now, if this was what was being developed, you have 200, let's say roughly round up the numbers, 250 years of training of this nature. And guess what happens after this training when Guru Gobind Singh says to Banda Singh Bahadur, go to Punjab and establish the Khalsa Raj. So he comes to Punjab, and within 7 years, he establishes what is called Khalsa Raj. I don't want to use the word nation or nation state. Again, Raj has its own, what's the right word to use? You can say Raj is roughly like a republic or a nation state or a nation idea, but I don't want to use any of this because again, this is the indigenous term. This is the term used in South Asia and later by British as well when they call it the British Raj. So Raj is what gets established. Within 7 years, it functions, actually he established it within 13 months. And it operated for almost 6 years. And what is he doing? He's coming to Punjab, fighting battles, consolidating land, and one major thing I will mention here, he does not capture power for himself. He does not declare himself to be the king or a Badshah or anything. In fact, pretty much every historian agrees with this, that what he did was he took and he created something what historians call a land reformation, which actually is not an accurate term, it should be land revolution. The state at the time used to keep 3/4 of the land and tillers of the soil. The commoners used to have 1/4 of the land. He reversed it. He said state will keep it 1/4 and people will have the 3/4 of the land. So that's not a reformation, that's not a small change. It goes from 25% to 75%, which belongs to people. It's a revolutionary idea that the land belongs to people, those who are going to use that to create again incomes and economic centers of that nature. Now this is something very, very interesting. This is what happened to Mughal dynasty. All of you are sitting here, what happened to the largest dynasty South Asia has ever seen? Nobody talks about it, how did it die? In fact, you will hear almost about the glory days of Babur and Akbar and Shah Jahan, but what happened, I would submit to you, Banda Singh Bahadur happened. Nobody wants to give credit to the Sikhs, that they were destroying the institutions which Mughals have developed, and they were creating imperial system, and Banda Singh Bahadur was actually fighting and creating people's movements everywhere. And this is what happened. And guess what he had to pay with his life? Eventually he was captured and martyred. And that's the cost of fighting for freedom. You guys have heard that phrase now. It's become a cliche and a rhetoric that freedom is not free. You bet it's not free. It takes a lot of lives. And his was given for that as well. This was the area he developed. So they fought. They became sovereign. This is the territory which eventually was... in fact, most of the time, if I may here, see, if you look at this area, this is like a half of a butterfly, this is the other half of a butterfly, and this used to be the consolidated Punjab. In 47, with the British map making, half of the wing was clipped. And that's why Sikhs and Punjabis haven't figured out how to fly again since 47. And I'm using that in a flowery way, but that's exactly what it is. We are struggling to locate ourselves and contextualize ourselves in the world arena because some serious stuff happened in 47. And we haven't had a good dialogue and conversation on it yet. Okay, coming back to it, what did you do in this? Now look at the coinage and the seals which I'll talk about when Banda Singh Bahadur becomes a ruler. I mean, you look at the loose translation, this is the coin he releases, and on one side it says, coin struck in both words by the guarantee of Guru Nanak's sword. Look at the symbolism. Because in Guru Granth Sahib, sword came from Guru Nanak, not Guru Gobind Singh. Remember the quote I showed you in Guru Granth Sahib? It said that Guru Nanak transferred sword and wisdom to Guru Angad, the next Guru. So this whole, distinguishing elements we have developed between Guru Nanak and the rest of the Gurus is totally unfounded based on Sikh theology and Sikh history. And you'll see even Banda Singh Bahadur is very careful about what he writes. And he says, guaranteed by Guru Nanak's sword, by the grace of Sovereign Master, victory to Guru Gobind Singh, the King of Kings. And on the other side, this is the more important part in my opinion, because this I think more or less Sikhs know, minted in the age of peace by the blessed fortune of the Khalsa, sanctioned by the glorious throne in the city, year 2. We don't have any coin which is struck in 1710, we haven't found one yet, but this coin was struck in 1711. Now, generally, you will see the later Sikh rulers, they actually started issuing coins in their names. This was very much in the idea of Sikh doctrine. You're establishing something for people, you're not doing it in your personal name or personal power, you're doing it for people. And this is what Banda Singh Bahadur was doing. This was his seal, which is very, very interesting again. It carries that whole idea of how the power needs to be captured and who is it for. It said, this is his seal, the cauldron to feed, sword to defend, and resultant victory have been achieved with the unrestrained help received from Guru Nanak to Guru Gobind Singh. So Deg Teg Fateh is the phrase which Sikhs even say today, but they have forgotten that victory only comes when you have economic rights and political rights. That's what that phrase means. The job of Sikhs is Deg is a big cauldron where the food is cooked. It's symbolic of economic rights. And Teg literally means sword, which is symbolic of political rights. And this is saying the victory to the people comes when you have economic rights and when you have political rights. Not spiritual rights, because nobody's putting a gun to your head as to what to remember, right? You can do whatever you want in your home. That's not much of a right. Rights are measured in your economics and politics. What happens in the next 100 years is even more remarkable. I'll run quickly through it, because this is the history of 18th century Sikhs. In 18th century, Sikhs were declared outlaws. This is the period where we know very little, but we know these things at least. Killing and looting was deemed legal. You had a right to kill Sikhs. In fact, there was a price on heads and there were public executions. And the reason I'm mentioning this is, this gets located in 84 as well. And I'll come to that in a few minutes. Within this period, you have two large holocausts. I have in parentheses or inverted commas, because Holocaust has its own connotation within the Nazi Germany era of the killing of Jews and others. But think of being Kalukara is the Sikh term which is used. 15,000 killed in one day and 13,000 killed the other day by these two people. And in fact, at one point, Zakaria Khan declares there is no Sikh left. He actually claimed, the state claimed, the governor of Lahore claimed there is not a single Sikh left, because they had put price on every Sikh head. What did Sikhs do when this was going on? This is an extreme, harsh period, you can call it, or dark period, some people call it. Well, their responses were very different. Sikhs never thought that they were a harsh period for them. They actually, when the government declared there is no Sikh left, two guys set up a tax collection point, and their name were Bota Singh and Garja Singh. The point was they were symbolically saying, no, you have not killed all of them. If you want to go on the GT road, which connected Lahore to Delhi, the two power centers of South Asia, they said, you got to pay tax to us, we are very much here. Now this is an act of defiance. And then other people at the same time, Baghel Singh, Jassa Singh Ahluwalia, they captured Delhi 17 times. In fact, at one point, the state said, leave it to us and we will pay you tax, and that's when they left it. So even when Sikhs are being hunted, the skirmishes with rulers, the act of defiance, the act to capture power were never dying. Even if there were one or two people doing it, or a small bands of Sikhs doing it. The point is, this became part of their larger thesis. And if you read the people who are giving responses, their history, they're pretty much doing what the Guru period Sikhs used to do. Develop an internal strength by being spiritual, and the sign of externalization of your spiritual strength was you fight for people's rights. And that's exactly what they did. And this is a phrase which became known for the 18th century Sikhs. The Khalsa is not subservient to anyone. They are either fully sovereign or die in a state of rebellion. To these downtrodden Sikhs, I have that sovereignty. They shall never forget the Guru Prophet. Again, you will notice Sikhs were, in Punjabi they say they became either Baghi or Badshah. So you're either fighting the imperial forces, or you establish your own setups which were independent of the state. regardless of what you were doing it with a very clear idea that these downtrodden Sikhs, downtrodden is the ones who don't have any rights. So idea was always to fight to establish people's right. That's what the fight was about. Then came the British. All I want to mention here is in the Ranjit Singh period, this is not a topic to discuss him and his forces, but this establishes at minimum, if he is going through 5 treaties, treaties are signed between independent countries or nations or territories. I mean, there is no doubt that Sikhs had their own empire. We can debate about its effectiveness, and the factors which included other countries included, these 5 regional forces of the time. Punjab was a separate country, and that's what the treaties were. United Kingdom, Afghanistan, China, and Russia were the factors in these treaties. They mentioned them, which territory will be controlled and which tax will be given by who. So if all this is going on in early 1800s, there is absolutely zero doubt. I think most of you already know that the Sikhs had their own country. So when the time comes to talk about having their own country in the last 50 years, we need to again locate it in history that there always has been. And by the way, the word conflict, I mean, I don't need to invoke Middle East here. The conflict is primarily over land. You can give whatever name you want to give it, and if most of you might be from Punjabi backgrounds, 2 brothers will cut their heads off. It's always over land. So conflicts come down to land, and we can spin them however we want to, give them a religious or a political fervor, but eventually it comes down to who is controlling which territory and what laws are being implemented in those territories. That's why the fight becomes about the land. Now let's come to the Crown and the Sikhs. The relationship between, when British in 1849 became the rulers of South Asia, so far I've covered Mughals, some invaders, and the Sikhs themselves. Well, this is what's happening under the British. Sikhs are less than 2% of the population. Some of you have probably seen all these statistics. The only thing I'm trying to mention is there are 2 ideas. What is happening within India or Punjab, and what is happening outside India. Ghadar Lehar was started in America. They used to fund the movement from US and Canada in those days. It's called the I-5 movement, the West Coast movement in America. We are from Berkeley to Stanford to small universities in Oregon, and all the way Komagata incident is Vancouver. Now interestingly, 100 years ago, if the money and people were being sent to Punjab to fight for freedom movement, nobody had an issue. But if this happens in 80s, you have a lot of issues. So again, we need to contextualize it. This has always been the Sikh tradition. The 18th century Sikhs I mentioned, in fact, the ones who went to the Darbar Sahib complex to free it, the major players, the 2 of them, sort of like Beyan Singh and Satwan Singh, they came from diaspora as well. Diaspora is Punjab. They came from outside Punjab, Rajasthan. Beyan Singh and Satwan Singh came from Delhi. So diaspora has always played a role. So we have to, the Sikh narrative is, the diaspora and homeland work together on each issue. We just have to figure out how to, this is to understand the Sikh psyche and the Sikh movement. Now what you look at here is, Sikhs are on both sides. Back then, this is the World War I, World War II era, and you have Axis and allies going on. So this is about the political ideology of the Sikhs. So in British context, whether you are with the Liberals or the Labours or the, the Tories, it really doesn't matter. One thing you'll note is the Sikhs were part of the Indian National Army, 60%. And these guys were with the Axis, and the allies were the rest of this. Some of them fought with the British, some of them fought against British. Point I'm trying to make here is, if you look at this chart, less than 2% of the population is giving anywhere from 60 to 100% of the sacrifices to get freedom for India. So this is where what happens after 47 has to be seen in this light. The people who died to make India free, because this is part of their spirituality and politics, they are going to have issue with India because of their treatment in India, in free India so-called, because they are the ones who died for India. So again, this whole thesis of after 47, Sikhs are dealing with different labels. Until 47, every Indian used to talk about how they are the saviors of India, how they are the ones who got so many things done, fought with the invaders and stuff like that. But after 47, anytime Sikhs have talked about their rights, whether it's in 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, or now, the terms like terrorists, agents of Pakistan, and separatists became synonymous with Sikhs. There's a reversal after 1947, because now you have different master. And to talk about that, let me first give you one idea from British agent. read this quote. And this is very interesting. This is the Criminal Intelligence Report under the British, final 1911. And they are already seeing what is happening to Sikhs and Hindus. There seems to be a conflict. And Hinduism has always been hostile to Sikhism, whose gurus powerfully and successfully attack the principle of caste, which is the foundation on which the whole fabric of Brahmanism has been reared. The activities of the Hindus have therefore been constantly directed to undermining of Sikhism, both by preventing the children of Sikh fathers from taking Pahal and by reducing professor Sikhs from their allegiance to their faith. Hinduism has strangled Buddhism, once a formidable rival to it, and it has already made serious inroads into the domain of Sikhism. Why am I sharing this? Now, I'm going to stick to the idea, the political idea of the word Hindu and Sikh, without getting into the religious ideologies. Important thing to note here is that Sikh fathers are being prevented, or children are being prevented from taking Pahal. Pahal is the initiation ceremony, the Amrit ceremony. This is 100 years ago, guys, in Punjab. And if you look at the movements in Punjab at the time, there are all sorts of conversion movements are going on to convert Sikhs. And second is, and this is a more important one, Sikhs are not giving allegiance to their faith anymore. Allegiance of the Sikhs then becomes nationalistic or individualistic after this period, which is very important to keep in mind. Like today, you ask even the Amritdhari Sikhs, the ones who have gone through the initiation ceremony, they won't know who their allegiance is to. It'll be to some organization or individual. They have no idea of this guru and the institutions which gurus were establishing, which was to establish people's rights. Let's come to post-47. The new rulers in India. This is the leader of the Sikhs at the time. I think he captures what the Sikhs are feeling after 1947. Englishman has gone, but our liberty has not come. For us, the so-called liberty is simply a change of masters, black for white. Under the garb of democracy and secularism, our panth, our liberty, and our religion are being crushed. So this is not 80s, this is 50s. This is the leader of the Sikhs who represents the Sikh political thought and Sikh political party. This is his statement. So obviously there's a struggle starting right after 47, that Sikhs do not feel that their rights, constitutional rights, religious rights, water rights, economic rights, nationalization of banks, replacement of Hindu Marriage Act of Sikhs with a Hindu Marriage Act, all sorts of measures are being brought in to reduce Sikhs' legal identity to that of a Hindu. And that becomes a huge issue from 47 onwards. And so this is the history in brief of what happens between 47 and 84. What I want you to focus on, and you can read there, is in 84 is the violent act of the government and Sikh response, which is a militaristic response. Until then, if you look at the policies being adopted, number of people who are dying, Sikhs are observing Slavery Day in 1960. 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 people being arrested in between 1950 and 1966 as what we would today call in a civil disobedience movement. By any means, this was not a fringe movement, or this was not a militant movement. Between 47 and 84, until Operation Blue Star, which is the government name for what they did, there have been incredible, in America we call these Jim Crow laws. In the Western world we can say the discriminatory policies were adopted where the targets were Sikhs. And you can see some of it, what has been going on. So again, when this kind of movement is going on, you're going to have, in 84 we have to contextualize a bit. So let's pick a few people. There's a huge issue on 1984, and this is a Remembrance Week here where we're remembering soldiers from various wars in England. Well, this is a Remembrance Week for Sikhs as well, and we're remembering what happened in 84, both June and between June and November onwards as well. Let's see what independent sources are saying about what happened. So there's a lot of contextualization which is needed as to what happened in June and November. First thing, I just want to focus on this. Joyce Pettigrew says it was an attack not on a political figure or a movement, but to suppress a religion, to attack their heart, to strike a blow at their spirit and self-confidence. This is very important. She is an anthropologist from Belfast University, now retired. She's saying, there should be no confusion among Sikhs. You cannot repeat the Indian government narrative that they went inside to capture Pindrawani and his men. This was nothing like it. Then why did they attack 38 other Gurdwaras? Why did they choose the holiest, one of the holy day of Sikh martyrdom day of Guru Arjan Sahib, the one who started a state within a state? So this is very symbolic. Government chooses to go there when they know this is a martyrdom of the guy who started a state within a state in the Mughal period. And then let's look at, this is Kepley, Cynthia Kepley Mahmood. She writes, 70,000 troops in conjunction with the use of tanks and chemical gas was used to go inside Darbar sub-complex. Now 70,000 is her word. If you look at the support staff from the Western Command, from Chandi Mandir, it's 150,000 people who were used with paramilitary troopers. Now, how is this? Do you go to capture 100 people according to Indian government to even go do this? The DC of Amritsar says, give me arrest warrants, I'll go arrest them. But they don't do this. Why don't they do this? This is why they went with so many forces. This is Lieutenant General S.K. Sinha. I want to focus quite a bit on what he's writing here. This is the guy, let me just explain this. This is the guy who was asked by the Indian government 18 months in advance to prepare to demolish this place, Golden Temple Complex. 18 months in advance. So when the Indian government or the Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi at the time says, we are going inside the temple as a last resort with a prayer on our lips, it's just not true. This is the guy who said, I was ordered. He's a very celebrated military leader of India. This is the guy who has been in the military since 40s in India. He has served at a couple of UN assignments at a world level, and then he was asked to do prepare for these in a Chakrata and Doom Valley to prepare with replicas to deliver the highest level of damage to this complex. So he says, I was asked to prepare 18 months in advance. In August 1983, they asked me to implement the order. The orders got leaked in April 84. Attack was in June 84. And he says, I refuse to carry out these orders. In fact, look at what he said. Not only did he refuse, he went on public record saying, in view of these military preparation, if Sant Pindrawale and his men decided to defend the Golden Temple with all their might and means, no one can and should blame them. This is very interesting from the guy who was doing the preparations. Why? Because he has a better understanding of Sikh psyche. He says, you're duty-bound to do your all when you know someone is going to raid your house. In this case, the house was the holiest Sikh shrine in the world. Generally we have a lot of confusion regarding what happened in June 84. From the guy who did the preparation, this is his statement. I think it's very important to understand and contextualize what he's telling us. What he's telling us is this, what the Sikh writers tell us all the time. Patwan Singh wrote a book, The Golden Temple. In the beginning of the book he wrote, it took the industry, passion, perseverance and sacrifices of whole generations to build, adorn and defend it. Every Sikh knows this, including people like Khushwant Singh, regardless of their politics, did not totally disagreed with and wrote about what happened in June 84 and gave their medals back to the Indian government. Because this complex has always been attacked when you are trying to suppress the public at large, Sikh people at large. And Patwan Singh is very clear about it, and Kapoor Singh writes the same thing. The Golden Temple has a theopolitical status, which is not a matter of concession by political state, but it is a right. So every ruler of South Asia has demolished this Golden Temple complex. Why? Because they feel when Sikhs gather there, they develop particular sort of a strength, and they pass resolutions, they pass policies to defend not only their own institutions, but anyone who's invading South Asia. And this is where they assemble, this is where they discuss freely. So the Sikh psyche already has this into them. Lieutenant General S.K. Sinha is saying, if the army goes in there, they have a right to defend it. And that's what these guys did. Let's move to November 84 quickly. Again, you can watch what the Indian TV is showing this year. In the last 3 days, there have been a lot of debates on Indian TV regarding what happened in November 84. But this is what the independent sources are saying. The Prime Minister assassination seized upon as a pretext to trigger a massive, deliberate onslaught on life, property, and honor of Sikhs. Deliberate, and it had nothing to do with Prime Minister assassination. That was just used as a pretext, is what report of Citizens Commission said, which was headed by Justice Sikri, a retired Supreme Court Justice of India, a non-Sikh. BBC said, essentially it was systematic and organized. Sikhs were stabbed, burned, and butchered to death. Okay, India Today is saying, they use the word, if you look at unprecedented Holocaust. Daily Mail said something like, the whole idea, you can read what's certain there. The point is, what happened in November 84, there have had numerous commissions and inquiries, 12 to date, a 13th one is just starting. There have been more commissions and inquiries than convictions. And the people who actually led the killings of the Sikhs, they forget about revoking their offices. They were given under the current government and previously the same party's government cabinet positions. So if anything, they have been rewarded for killing Sikhs. Now, you look at it from the Guru period, from the 18th century and today's perspective, when certain Sikhs individually, remember there have always been individual acts? So there have always been individual acts in 84 as well. And some of them have been group acts. We can debate and not understand why they chose to assassinate Mrs. Gandhi, which is what happened during these days. Why they chose to deliver justice or assassinate, if you want to use that word, General Vaidya, who was the guy who was brought back from retirement when Lieutenant General S.K. Sinha said, I will not do this operation, because he said, I have taken oath to fight the enemy, not the citizens of my own country. So there were individual acts again, just like in 18th century, just like what happened in London when there was a Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Well, there was a guy who came here to this country, Udham Singh. So individual acts have always been there. Not understanding the Sikh thesis or the Punjabi mentality or the Sikh psyche around it is not helping us locate this. Anyway, the question then might come as, why Sikhs fight? Why do Sikhs do this? I mean, I've tried to give you some ideas from spiritual sort of understanding of Sikhi based on Guru Granth Sahib and some of the historical precedents among Sikhs. Here is something from a book which I highly recommend. This is my #1 recommendation to understand why Sikhs are the way they are. And this is his thesis. Sardar Jagjit Singh has written this book, and he says this is the reason Sikhs fight. They are here to create egalitarian society. Egalitarian, you can look it up here, essentially means fighting for equal rights. Anytime Sikh is not doing that, then they are not fighting from a Sikh perspective. And you'll notice within the Sikh historical traditions, this is what they were after. We are here to fight religious and political domination. That's what Gurus did. Jagannath Puri is doing it, with Mughals he is doing it. So if Sikhs themselves are becoming a dominating force, then few Sikhs need to get up and fight with them as well.